So today I'm going to talk about designing evolutionary simulations for AGI. And when I say AGI, I'm talking about artificial general intelligence in the sense of a general theory of intelligence that's implemented in a computer system, not necessarily human level AI like it's commonly used. And so when we talk about general intelligence or intelligence in general, an AGI agent is more like a simple animal than actual human. And in fact, probably programming a human level agent is a very difficult task. And so if you picture an AGI agent, it has a certain cognitive configuration on the left. And it's embodied in some environment with some sensors, which it uses to observe that environment, and actuators, which it uses to modify that environment. And when agents share a core framework of intelligence but have different mind-body configurations, they can be considered as different species. The problem is that not all mind and body configurations result in coordinated behavior, and especially complex coordinated behavior. And so a major research question is, how can we determine AGI configurations that result in intelligent and complex coordination? And a solution for that is actually to automatically compute them using evolutionary simulations. So simulation in the context of AI means to design and create a virtual world, and then to embody AI agents with sensors and actuators in that world. And simulation is very useful for AI because both are implemented in computers. And simulation allows you to design custom environments, which you can use to test agent performance on any task that you can simulate, but also to simulate custom hardware without the real world cost and difficulty of obtaining that hardware. And so we can use simulations to study AI so as to evaluate AI frameworks, and also to train AI for real world tasks, as long as the simulated task is similar enough to the real world. And so here on the right, I have a GIF of a AI simulation with two NARS agents that are embodied in a Pong simulation, and they're learning how to play Pong in real time by competing against each other. So looking at evolution as meta-level adaptation, as opposed to object-level adaptation, which we would consider learning, on the meta level, an AGI system can be parameterized in a certain way, and then those parameter values can be automatically optimized using genetic algorithms. And so these evolvable parameters can be roughly split into two different classes, where you have the cognitive parameters, which are things like the system architecture, including the buffers and the memory structures, also the control mechanism and its function, decision thresholds, scalar values, and activation functions. Whereas on the other hand, bodily parameters, or the parameters for embodiment, are things like the body structure for the agent or its morphology, its physiology, its sensor type and density for various sensors, and also its various actuators. And so John Holland formalized this concept of genetic algorithms in his 1992 book, Adaptation in Natural and Artificial Systems, as a way to carry out evolutionary processes in a computer. And although there are many genetic algorithm variables in the formalization, we can just focus on theoretical considerations for alpha, which is the set of evolvable genomes. And this is designed by selecting a certain genetic language to use and how to encode the parameters using that genetic language. E, which is the actual simulated environment, which is created by the designer. And a mu, which is the quantitative fitness function, which is used to guide reproduction by evaluating each agent's performance. And so on the right, I have a little mock-up here of visualizing the co-evolution of both cognitive and bodily parameters. And as different species evolve, these parameters actually work together and co-evolve to improve coordination. So looking at some considerations when it comes to simulation design, A flexible simulation, in this context, I'll be talking about a 3D simulation, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, it could be 2D. But a flexible simulation requires a framework of artificial matter, which consists of abstract atomic components, which you can just call atoms, which are used to justify the various physical structures in E. So just as an example, you can call them whatever you want. You could call them red atoms, blue atoms, metal atoms, mineral atoms, and so on. But the point is that these atoms justify the structures in the simulation by enforcing this concept of equal exchange, sort of like a conservation of mass or energy. And this is important because without an abstract currency to enforce fair exchange, the simulation is unpredictable and nonsensical. And this simulation should not allow matter to be created or destroyed to prevent issues like the agents finding infinite resource exploits, and to prevent the environment from vanishing. Then using an artificial chemistry, the atoms can actually combine into new types of atoms, or you could just call them molecules, since they would probably consist of multiple atoms that store energy. Then the agents would consume and decompose these molecules to extract energy. So for an example, on the right here, I have this picture of a voxel world. And you could have, for example, one of these voxels or one of these cubes could correspond to a single atom. And then when an agent consumes one of these voxels, the underlying atom would be transferred to the agent. And so in this way, the matter in the environment is never created or destroyed, but it's simply transformed around the environment. Atoms and molecules are not only for building the terrain, but also for constructing the agent bodies according to their genomic specification. So the bodily parameters could include primitive body segments, for example, cubes, which are scaled in different directions to create an agent morphology, but also atoms would be traded for special purpose body parts or tools that provide hard-coded functionalities to the agent. Although I say hard-coded, but certain aspects of them could be made evolvable. So hard-coded functionalities would include things like joints for limb rotation and movement, a mouth organ for molecule consumption, and also a stomach organ, which is used to extract energy. So certain molecules could fill the role of the agent's energy source. So in this picture on the right, this orange agent here might consume these green molecules in this green block to maintain its energy levels. Moving on to sensory motor, or the actual embodiment of the agent. In nature, sensory neurons measure very specific physical signals. So things like specific wavelengths of light, mechanical pressure, temperature changes. So without an extremely flexible simulated physics framework, designers actually need to manually specify the different modalities that they desire in E and also the evolvable sensors in alpha. So different sensory modalities could include things like vision, which you would simulate using graphics rendering, or touch, which you would simulate with a physical collision detection. The natural sensory neurons connect to the brain in what's called a topographic mapping. And we can simulate this by representing adjacent sensors, which we should know having the agent's genome. And we represent physically adjacent sensors adjacently in sensory maps before presenting them to the AGI system using a data structure like a network graph. So here on the left, I have an image showing that a simulated physical collision on an agent mesh, such as on its chest, could trigger sensations in a network of touch receptors. So extremely simple organisms react to a stimulus with the same pre-programmed reflex every time. But to surpass just a mere stimulus response behavior, agents require motivational signals to help inform centralized decision-making. And so the maintenance of homeostasis motivates natural agents in the form of hunger, pain, and cold, since these are critical to their survival. When a bodily system is in homeostasis, for example, when the agent's stomach is full, no motivation needs to be signaled. But when the subsystem sensors detect an exit from homeostasis, like when the stomach becomes empty, it signals motivation to the brain to restore that homeostasis through some centralized coordination and action, such as by seeking food and then eating it. And by simulating multiple homeostatic subsystems, it provides multiple sources of motivation for the agent, all which help guide behavior. So a stomach that has hunger is actually required for energy maintenance, but other evolved systems might be useful too. For example, a skin with pain would be used to protect the agent. And so pain sensations could be triggered when the skin is damaged, providing a sensation of pain, but also a desire to prevent that sensation, a goal of to not have the pain. And this would influence the agent to potentially retreat from the painful stimulus. Moving on to fitness and reproduction, in traditional genetic algorithms, each individual agent is scored using some fitness function mu, and then the genomes of the highest scores are recombinated or reproduced. In AI, we would ideally then want a mu that measures and evolves for intelligence. And although many have been proposed, like IQ, there is actually no widely agreed measure to quantify intelligence, either in humans or across species. Instead, in nature, agents actually prove their intelligent autonomy by managing to survive in a harsh environment and reproduce independently. So instead of guiding reproduction with mu, as in traditional genetic algorithms, we should require AGI agents to survive in a harsh environment and then achieve reproduction autonomously. And this implicit mu, or survival of the fittest, should evolve intelligent autonomy, although a very inhospitable environment will cause extinction, whereas a very easily survivable environment will not provide any evolutionary pressures for improved intelligent coordination. And so at minimum, simulated bodies need to provide the agent with a reproductive action, which is the ability to generate offspring, and motivation to encourage reproduction. So as a simple example of that, a gonad subsystem could motivate the agent to eat certain types of molecules like mineral atoms until it has stored one per body segment. And then when the gonad sensors detect that the agent has consumed and stored enough atoms to duplicate its genome, it could trigger asexual reproduction, as in this GIF on the left. So to evolve intelligence, a tautological fitness or implicit mu selects for reproduction optimizers, because species who tend to reproduce more will have more offspring, which will then tend to reproduce more. So to involve greater intelligence, we actually want to use survival of the fittest to improve agent ability to adapt to its environment with insufficient knowledge and resources. And so therefore, the best evolutionary pressures for greater intelligence are those which actually restrict access to knowledge and resources. And so this requires to simulate lethally dangerous uncertainties, which provides penalties for species that fail to work with insufficient knowledge. So this could be things like death from falling objects or from clumsy behavior, from laziness, overheating, and so on, but also to limit availability of critical resources, which is a penalty for species that fail to work with insufficient resources. And you can do this by making resources relatively rare to find in the environment, potentially generated by like a simulated flora, like plants or fungus. The competition between species is a primary adaptive pressure. So then as one species evolves greater abilities for gathering resources, the other species have to evolve to keep up, or they will risk extinction due to their lack of resources. And this is called the arms race phenomenon. Species which evolve and survive in a very complex competitive environment will be reproduction optimizers, yes, but despite the odds, exhibiting intelligent behaviors. Then you have to set the initial conditions of the environment. Once you have designed the framework for your simulation, you have to actually create the concrete environment. And this requires an environment that is enclosed, so you could have something that loops around like a planet or has some sort of border barriers. And this ensures that the species crowd together, forcing them to compete for resources and triggering the arms race phenomenon. Another important aspect is to implement a framework for artificial matter recycling, so that agents need to consume high energy matter. And when they do, they deplete its energy, creating inert atoms. And so a simulated flora framework, for example, could upcycle these atoms that are sapped of energy and restore them with energy using a mechanism like artificial sunlight, providing renewable resources for the agents. And then finally, you need to put your initial agents in E. And these can just be very simple organisms, something you could coin it amoeba level AI, which would be very easy to manually design as opposed to, human level AI. And these agents just need a minimal sensory motor coordination to let them navigate the environment and a reproductive ability to drive evolution. And so in summary, the evolutionary simulations automatically generate huge amounts of empirical data, which can be used to evaluate and improve AGI frameworks and also agent configurations. And although a body at first seems superfluous for a computer system, an AI system, cognition requires active perception using sensors and effectors. So the mind and body parameters co-evolve in evolutionary simulation to automatically determine those configurations, which are very synergistic. And there's no need to replicate all the aspects of our own physical world. We just need to identify and simulate the critical aspects of nature, such as resource limitations and implicit reproductive fitness, and that should be enough to incubate the evolution of intelligently coordinated species, as long as both the simulation and the AGI framework are sufficiently flexible. And that's all.